I'm going to move into the 19th century today and just look at Impressionism. So, a quick recap on what we've looked at so far. So, the first week, really particularly looking at this was from a Rembrandt, and basically what I did here was it's all water mixable oils for this project. I basically coated the board with thin paint, and then I wiped out the areas of light, and then just painted the darks in. And the idea of that is to be an underpainting, which you could then let that dry and then put other glazes, thin layers of oil paint over the top, a bit like a watercolour, sort of thin glazes. So that's that approach, kind of a more of an old masters approach. And same really with, I can't remember when Rembrandt was around, but Turn was more kind of 18th century. So this was looking at the Fighting Temeraire, a very similar approach. But instead of using brown, apparently he started to use like lighter colour canvases, so primed with a lighter colour. And then started with washes, so you can still see some of the bits of wash here. And then the second layer, some of this was the second layer. And quite a bit of textured paint, so we would have used palette knives in places, put down some light, like this, and then glazed a darker colour over the top. So that was the idea of just experimenting with that a little bit. So I thought today move onto the Impressionists and the 19th century. Looking at this image, which I thought is a reasonably straightforward. It's not overcomplicated with the drawing, so I thought keep it fairly simple. So this one I started on Tuesday with my Tuesday groups, and I thought I'd just do a little bit of a demonstration for the same sort of thing, but just concentrating on this bit. So got the idea from the techniques book, and I just rather thought that was quite nice, that detail where you can really zoom in and just look at the actual texture of the paint. The colours he's used, the brush marks, and he's kind of scratched into the paint to create texture. So I thought maybe just have a look. So it's exactly the same demo. Apparently according to this book, he started with quite a light coloured canvas, maybe white or pale yellow, then did some washes, so very thin paint of blue and pink. So this board actually started out blue, so I just kept that bit blue and added the pink. This one was a yellow board. And I mean, the kind of nice thing about this is sometimes having a warm colour and then putting other colours over the top, so it's like cooler colours over warm colours can look quite interesting anyway. Having this thin underpainting, so if some of this shines through, it doesn't particularly matter, it will kind of absorb into the painting. So this one, I'll just very quickly put a little bit of acrylic paint down for the underpainting, but he would have just used oils, let that dry. A lot of his work, not all of his work, but a lot of his work was painted on location. So if anybody wants to try some painting on location, we're going to be painting at Clifftown Parade on Sunday from about 11 o'clock, if anybody wants to join us. What he would have done was, with this sort of painting, he would have done it over a number of sessions. So he would have perhaps done an underpainting, done a bit of work on that, and quite often he worked in series. So this is Monet, I should have said. And I brought some of my Monet books in, and there are a whole series of paintings that he did of things like haystacks, Rouen Cathedral, all sorts of motifs that he chose. And he'd paint maybe for half an hour, then he swapped his painting over because the light would have changed, and worked on another one, and have a few on the go, and then eventually it comes to a point where he was happy with them. Obviously, you've got to have similar lighting conditions, so it'd be similar times of day and similar weather. So it needed to be sunny days or dull days, and that's actually sometimes I'll work that way. Quite often I like if I can to work in one session, but a lot of the time I don't get finished and things change too much. So I'll go back another day and do another layer until I've finished. So something like this, his paintings are very much built up with lots of little marks. Some of these areas here look quite broad, so perhaps I should start with some of those. Go with a slightly bigger brush and a little bit of ultramarine and some white. So obviously I've already got the blue, so I'll just bring some of that in, that's a little bit lighter. Places. And some, a little bit of white for the clouds, because that's actually standing out a bit more. And the other thing about the Impressionist is you can pretty much see the brush strokes. That's something that really distinguished them from the art that came before, where things would have been blended out. So they were quite happy to just leave things looking quite raw, quite you know, just leaving the brush marks looking as brush marks. And it's actually quite refreshing to have a go at something like this, because I too tend to blend things out and do tend to try and disguise brush marks a little bit. So it's quite nice to actually work from a painting. Some of these are bright white, but others are slightly, maybe slightly grey, slightly pinky. Just a tiny bit of colour in the clouds. That's probably too much. Just so that you've got kind of an off-white rather than a white. So something along those lines. Just go back to the blue and try a little bit of the greeny blue as well. And another thing that I do know about the Impressionists was they tended to avoid the earth colours. Well, that's something I read. So they're very much looking at brighter colours and mixing brighter colours. That's not standing out. So I'll go onto the tree now. Right, so I've started to mix some, so with that in mind, I thought I'd use reds and blues to make browns rather than use out the tube browns. Because some of this is quite, probably a little bit too dark, so add a bit of yellow and orange to that. So there's kind of lots of little kind of flicky marks. That. And then around here I quite like the fact that it's using blues, so it's almost like an atmospheric effect. Let's use this brush again. You can particularly see this a little bit more on that on the illustrations. There's sort of like mauvey colours and bluey colours, and it looks very much like he's painted the sky, let that dry, and then work those colours over the top. Try some of those.
You're using quite small brush strokes then.
Yeah. I think something like the tree probably would be quite small brush marks. It's not exactly painting individual leaves, but it's trying to give the impression of light bouncing off leaves. So things like blues mixed in there. It's got a little bit of purple as well, and a little bit of white, just make a lavender colour. And what happens is when you've got kind of warm colours and cool colours, they start to sort of vibrate a little bit against each other. So that can be quite a nice, interesting effect. So that's some of the things he's done. And then, as I say, the other thing he's done is he kind of scratched into the paint a little bit. He's kind of broken up the surface so you're not seeing the, you know, it kind of breaks up the paint marks a little bit. So again, that's quite interesting. I guess, you know, if you look closely, it probably looks a bit of a mess, but when you're looking overall, you're just looking at these different effects. There's a few darker marks there, so that's just about a few, two sort of darks in here. So I was thinking, well, that's quite an interesting thing to do. Rather than try and take on a whole painting, you know, I actually sort of found myself drawn into that little illustration more than the whole painting, really. So that might be quite fun to do. So that interesting. The other bit down here, I think is quite interesting. You've got almost like sort of greyish areas, but they're made out of bluey greys, purpley greys, things like that. So again, you probably wait for that to dry and then sort of scumble colour a little bit like that, so that you're still seeing other colours sort of popping through. sort of like, so some of the red's coming through. I almost want to try a little bit of green or something like that. That's going to be quite right. A little bit lighter. And perhaps having similar tones but different colours. So keeping the green and the lilac a similar sort of tone. So good fun to play around with.
Yeah.
Try and see where you can go with the painting side of it. All right, yep.